And here comes the last and final part of this mesmerizing story. In the last part, we ended with Liz and Mike deciding to seriously sit down and talk to each other. I think you already had a huge speculation as to what would really happen with this couple, and whether they would stay together or just split up. That's all we're going to find out tonight. Now a little integration, and we're going to get started. Let me remind you that we have an exclusive community on Patreon, where we have already posted the full version of this wonderful uncensored story in video and text format, so you can follow the link in the description or in the upper right corner and already watch the full version. I will also note that this story is posted for educational purposes only, so that any of my viewers can think about the fidelity of their spouse and warn themselves in advance against bad consequences. Basically, if you have put your like and subscribe to the channel, we can start our story. Unfortunate wishes. Chapter 3. It was the middle of a Saturday morning, and the couple sat like two strangers in their own living room. Ariana and her daughter Jas had gone out to leave them alone. So Liz, Mike, her husband, said, "We need to talk." Had it really only been 7 days since she'd said those very 4 words to him and started the destruction of their relationship? According to her, their lives had become routine, and they needed to reconnect by meeting other people. What she really meant was that she wanted to spend the evening with a work colleague, but knew that a friend of her husband's from the cricket club, who worked at the same car dealership, would tell Mike if he suspected she was doing something secretly. Liz looked at Mike and prepared to speak. Mike raised his hand to stop her. "No, me first." He took a deep breath. "I thought we had a happy, solid marriage. I was clearly wrong. In fact, I'm not sure we have anything left now. If you'd had a drunken night out after the office party, I might have been willing to forgive you. But this obsession of yours to spend time with Gerald has been going on for weeks, and you've even tried to portray it as fixing our relationship." Liz whimpered. "I know, Mike, but I've convinced myself that if we hang out with other couples more often, it will bring us closer together." Mike snorted. "And how do you think that works? Did you even think about me last night? If so, were you seriously picturing me sitting there thinking about your mental image? Did you? Because if Ariana and Jas hadn't stayed to keep me company, I would have just drunk myself unconscious." She couldn't help it and regretted it as soon as she opened her mouth. "You handled that well." She stopped talking abruptly when Mike glared at her. "You expect a fucking thank you?" he exclaimed in amazement. "Yes, I did, but I would have preferred to have my wife by my side. However, she preferred you-know-what herself. Ariana first came just to keep me company, and Jas told you this morning how she took advantage of the opportunity." Mike shook his head. "And you know what?" he exploded, still angry at her comment. "I still almost sent them away. Just the thought of being here alone while you're with that prick made me ask them to stay after all." He calmed down a little. "The 3 of us solved each of our own problems, but these women deserve better than to be a distraction for me while you're promiscuous." Liz tried again. "But Ayana said you have a list of women." Mike broke into the conversation. "She told everyone in the office about our agreement, and apparently suggested that single women let her know if they were interested in—" He tried to pick a word. "Comforting me while you expand your experience." "What, your whole office knows?" exclaimed Liz. "Is that what you made of it?" he exclaimed. "It's okay for you to sleep around, but I'm supposed to keep it a secret so I don't embarrass you?" Liz had the good sense to leave it at that. Mike looked at his watch. "My match starts in an hour, and I don't intend to be late because of this shit. I'll be back around 6, and you—" He threw up his hands in frustration. "You can do whatever you want." Liz sat in silence, pondering Mike's outburst. She finally realized how badly she had misjudged herself. If she had been honest about her concerns, they could have talked. But trying to manipulate Mike was just stupid. And GED. Jesus. The man was a goddamn dinosaur. Apparently, he was so used to seducing desperate, unhappy women that he never had to worry about being at least a competent lover. Liz understood why Sandra, Ged's wife, was willing to be with other men. She was probably getting a better evening than their unfaithful wives were getting with GED. With Mike, she would definitely get one. Liz understood that she needed to rebuild her relationship with her husband, but at the same time, she was honest enough to realize that what she had confessed to Mike was true. She couldn't get rid of her desire, and didn't understand how she could satisfy this destructive need and still be married to Mike. Damn it. After an uncomfortable Saturday night on Sunday, Liz told Mike that she was going to visit her mother for the day, and that Mike could call her on her mom's landline anytime if he wanted to make sure she was where she said she was. Mike spent most of the day at the cricket club, net and bar, and so they spent another day apart. That evening, as they sat there, trying obviously not to avoid each other, Mike had to speak up. "I think our marriage is in deep shit, but..." He took a breath before continuing, "I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind at the moment to make that decision. So I'm going to give myself at least a week to calm down. In the meantime, I suggest you consider whether there's anything here worth saving, and if there is, what the hell you can do or say to make a difference." He grabbed a book off the shelf and went to bed. The next morning, as they each got ready for work, the atmosphere was as chilly as it had been all weekend. Mike left the house as soon as he was ready. He didn't want to linger in his wife's presence any longer than necessary, and came to work noticeably earlier than usual. Those of his co-workers who came early noted the change in his habit and wondered if it was an indication that his new open marriage had begun in earnest. Ariana arrived about 10 minutes after Mike, but as was her custom, she opened her computer to see if anything urgent had come up over the weekend. After gathering her strength, she joined Mike in his office. Mike looked up from the screen as she knocked and entered. "Good morning, Ariana. Did you have a good weekend?" "Yes, thanks for asking, Mike," she grinned. "My daughter and I met up with an old friend, and he took us to places we've never been before." Mike couldn't help but smile, knowing that this mundane conversation meant nothing to their co-workers in the main office. "Close the door, please. There are a couple of questions I need your advice on." "Okay," he began. "Work first." Together, they reviewed the progress of the various projects, switching employees from work ahead of schedule to work approaching the deadline, until they were sure the employees had a clear direction for the rest of the week. When they were done, Ariana looked at her boss with concern on her face. "How did it go after we left?" she asked. "I guess I screwed up from the start," he said, humbled. "How did you calculate that?" she asked, genuinely perplexed. "It was that damn treaty." He could barely contain his anger. "I actually signed a document giving that fool permission to spend the evening with that bastard. I was surprised when you showed it to me, but assumed you had a reason." He sighed. It made sense at the time. Liz said something to the effect that if we both agreed to do it with other couples, then, and this is the important part, the part that made me react the way I reacted, we wouldn't have to cheat. It was at that point that it became obvious that she fully intended to be with someone else, and if I refused to realize that, she would just do it behind my back. The agreement was just a reaction that was supposed to give me more opportunity to change her mind. "And look what happened," he added bitterly. Ariana understood his reasoning, so she nodded and asked, "Have you decided what you're going to do next?" He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling as if searching for inspiration. "I see only 3 options. I can do nothing and accept that my marriage is the way it is now. I can try to work through it and see if counseling can convince her to give up this obsession. Or, and I think this is inevitable, we'll divorce." "Can I ask something very personal?" hesitantly said Ariana. Mike looked at her in amazement. "After what we pulled 2 days ago, you're afraid to ask a personal question? Jesus, I'm almost afraid to ask what it is. Do you still love her?" she said simply. "You know?" he replied. "I can't look at her. I can't bear to be with her. She betrayed me, and I know I should hate her, but hell." His voice lowered. "Yes, I think I still love her." "Did you tell her about it?" she asked quietly. Meanwhile, Liz arrived at the dealership at her usual time, not knowing what to expect from GED, and sure enough, there he was, giggling with his buddies as she walked in. She was a little surprised by the colder-than-usual reception from the other women in the office. Surely GED wasn't bragging in front of them. She then went into the small break room to make herself a drink, and saw a new notice on the board. It was their contract with her fucking signature at the bottom, written in marker. Where the fuck had that come from? Shocked, she headed to her desk to get to work, but then her boss intercepted her and invited her into his office. "Is your new marital status going to be a problem?" he asked. She shook her head tiredly. "As far as I know, no one here knew anything about it. All I can assume is that I left a copy of the agreement with my husband on my desk, and someone found it, copied it, and posted it on the board to embarrass me." "Very well," he said. "It doesn't concern me as long as it doesn't affect business. As soon as it does, I will take action. Is that clear?" She nodded, and he dismissed her. About an hour later, the new temp walked past Liz's desk and into the break room, giving Liz a sympathetic smile. GED soon followed, smirking after her. A moment later, there was a squeal, and a young female voice shouted, "Get your filthy hands off me, you dirty old pervert!" The whole office heard and fell silent. Then, all the women and most of the men rushed to the door. Liz heard Ged's voice, "Give up that innocence, you were asking for it." Liz closed her eyes and shook her head. If he apologized, there would be hope for him. The women who worked there would leave in droves if he kept his job after this. Mike was busy preparing a bid for a major new contract when the phone rang. He answered it. It was James from the cricket club, Liz's boss. "Mike, do you have a minute to chat? She's had some things happen that you should know about." Mike felt sick to his stomach. "Is Liz okay?" he asked. "She's fine, Mike," came the reply. "I'm sorry. Maybe I should have started with that." Mike relaxed. "Okay, I'm listening to you. Okay, this is going to sound like a soap opera, but it's been my fucking day so far. I came in this morning and found an open prenup with your name pinned in the staff room. I assume it's real?" "Yes, it is," Mike confirmed. "I thought so. That explains our conversation last week. I suppose GED was behind it somehow?" "As far as I can tell," Mike said. "Apparently he went through just about every desperate older woman in your house and finally hit on Liz, and that slumbering fool fell for it." "Well, something has clearly gone wrong. There was no love lost between them this morning, so this fool seems to have decided to direct his attention to our mutual friend as the next conqueror. Nothing good came of it." "Is she all right?" "Certainly better than GED," James snorted. "That stupid bastard told one of the guys that she had a gag reflex before he followed her into the staff room. Perhaps, in retrospect, he shouldn't have said that to a decent young man with 2 younger sisters. Anyway, Scott was about to intervene when Eliza made her feelings, shall we say, loudly known. Nothing GED said afterward helped. He basically called her a tease, and in front of an entire group of women. I think I did him a favor by firing him on the spot before they lynched him. Mike interrupted. "James, you didn't fire that bastard because of me, did you?" "God, no. That's not why I called. I fired him because he was an asshole and he deserved it. No, I'm embarrassed to admit that I intend to give his job to Liz to make Eliza permanent." "I still don't understand what the problem is," Mike said. "Oh, okay," James replied. "Neither of us will shed a tear for GED, but I wasn't sure how you would feel about me promoting Liz, so I thought it was only fair to tell you. I just know she'll do the job just as well as GED, and I won't have to spend time and money on outside help." Mike thought for a moment. "No matter how Liz and I pair up, we can't be allowed to influence how you run your business. You have to do things the way you see fit. Nevertheless, I appreciate you letting me know. By the way, please thank Elise for her help. I'll give you a small thank you gift to give the next time you see her." The rest of the day went relatively smoothly for both of them. In the morning, Liz put the cassoulet on the boil, and when Mike came home, the house was filled with the wonderful aroma of red wine and herbs. They agreed to eat together in the kitchen, and Mike poured 2 large glasses of wine, while Liz filled 2 bowls and sliced a baguette. Mike complimented Liz on the food, and decided to be frank with her. "I think it's only fair to tell you that James called me today. He told me what happened with Gerald, and I want you to know that the decision to fire that idiot was entirely James. I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry, but it wasn't revenge on my part." "You know what?" said Liz, taking a sip of wine. "I'm not sorry either. He smirked at me just before he tried to grope the poor girl. I honestly think that scumbag was trying to make me jealous. I went and apologized to her and asked her to lunch. She set her fork aside, put her elbows on the table, rested her chin on her hands, and stared at her husband. That's when she told me she was the one who reported to you. Mike continued to eat. Finally, he spoke up. I was planning on giving her a couple hundred for her efforts. Now, since she blabbed to you, I think I'll give her 400. The girl has a conscience, and that should be rewarded. Liz told Mike how events had unfolded that morning and gave him a meaningful look when she told him about the contract pinned to the bulletin board. Eliza admitted that she had left it in the copier, but she hadn't pinned it. Liz also told him how she had stopped the other guy from hitting GED. Young Scott seemed to have a crush on Elise, and it was him, not GED, who had been smiling at her that morning. They filled their glasses and moved into the living room. Mike took a sip and asked the question he dreaded the answer to. Ariana asked me how our conversation went after she left us. I told her that getting you to sign the agreement was a mistake. Was it? Did I give you permission to be with GED, or would you have done it regardless? Liz looked at her husband and saw the grief and guilt in his eyes. It wouldn't have happened, but while he and I were working together, he tried to get into my soul, and I suspect I would have given in eventually. She looked thoughtfully into her glass. I'll say that as an explanation, not an excuse. GED was nothing like you. He was tall, confident, or arrogant if you prefer, muscular, and had real charm when he wanted to. He was older than me, and clearly only interested in a one-night stand, not a relationship in any way. She took a sip of wine and looked at her husband. Mike leaned back in his chair and listened as she continued. He convinced me that an evening with him would be amazing because he's so rich and experienced. I also let myself believe that you would get so excited at the thought of being with another woman that you would let it happen. Liz relaxed a little as she confessed. I resisted at first, for a few weeks. But then I admitted to myself that I was curious, that it would be exciting, and the opportunity was in front of me, and all I had to do was convince you. By the time I actually brought it up with you, I'd been thinking about it for a couple months, and I had a grand plan. You and me with great pairings, sharing, and... She stopped and took another drink. And it was all a complete fucking fantasy. GED was a loser. Sandra is a stultified, battered housewife, desperate for a decent man. Neither of them the type to dream of. The sad thing is that I, supposedly an intelligent grown-up woman, allowed this half-wit to tempt me into cheating on my husband. She looked at Mike. I have to ask, are you with Ariana? He managed to smile. In 10 years, I haven't even pecked you on the cheek. I think you knew that yourself. Liz smiled as well. Yeah, I never thought you'd be so obvious about spending the night with your secretary, even if she looks like Ariana. And her daughter. Oh my God, she's just as stunning as her mother. You know, you looked so at ease with both of them that morning. Tell me honestly, was it that awful? Mike shook his head. No, it was far from horrible. But you have to realize that they were only there for me because you weren't. If you had been in our bed instead of Ged's, life would have gone on and I would have been content. Liz studied her glass, contemplating what to say next. Can I ask a favor? Mike's raised eyebrow would have impressed even Ariana. Intriguing. And what would that favor consist of? There are actually several parts to it, some big, some less so, but please think carefully before you answer. Mike nodded and leaned back in his chair. She finished her wine and set the glass on the table. She turned to her husband. Please, can I be your wife until you find someone else? You can dictate the terms of our marriage, and I won't contest our divorce when you're ready, but there's no reason for both of us to be lonely and miserable until then. Mike was stunned, but decided to hear her out. She continued. Thank you for not laughing out loud. I know it must have come as a shock, but I meant what I said. My next request is that you think about whether you will ever be able to have a nice evening in bed with me again. Mike again resisted the temptation to respond. He agreed to think about her questions, but these ones were profound. She smiled, seeing his confusion. I'm not sure how you'll feel about that. She took a deep breath. Please ask Ariana to find a woman to stay with you this weekend as we agreed. Seeing his expression turn rigid, she raised her hand. No, you have my word. I'll be here alone while you're gone. I've been horrible to you and I deserve to experience the same things I was willing to subject you to? Mike frowned. I'm not the one manipulating you. She paused. Or maybe I am, but until you're ready to do this with me, you need someone to give you pleasure. I told you you could dictate terms, and I meant it. Is that it? He asked. Because that's a lot to think about. There's something else, she replied. When I asked you to consider whether you could do this with me, I meant what you did before. I feel soiled knowing that the last man I was with was GD. Please take me back. Make me yours again, any way you want. Use me however you want, if it gives you pleasure. Please don't let him be the last man to touch me. Mike struggled to think of any coherent answer. Meanwhile, Liz sat in silence as he considered her words. Finally, he said, I guess I really asked you to think about what you could do or say to save our marriage. I admit, you surprised me. She waited for him to continue. Your first 2 questions will have to wait until the pain subsides a bit. If I try to answer now, it will be too soon. As for the rest, I don't know if I'm ready for a casual evening with other women the way you suggest. And your idea of me bringing you back to myself? He struggled to find the words to reply. Without a word, Liz left the room and went upstairs. She returned 5 minutes later in her robe. She carefully placed the things she had brought with her on the table in front of Mike's chair. She looked Mike in the eye. Do whatever you want. She stood before him, offering herself as atonement for her betrayal. Her husband was at a loss. It had never occurred to him that they would ever be lovers again. But his answer to Ariana's question that he still loved Liz echoed in his mind, followed by Ariana's reply, Did you tell her that? Mike looked helplessly at the woman standing before him. You can't be serious. Are you just trying to say something? Liz looked at him with grim determination on her face. If you do this, even just to please yourself, I'll like it. Mike visibly paled as he listened to her pleas. I'm sorry, but I'm not, he stammered. She spoke furiously. I told you I didn't put up with it. I realize now how stupid it was. It was a fantasy, a fiction. I don't deserve the loving husband I betrayed. Teach me a lesson, Mike. I still won't fight you when you divorce me for someone more deserving. But while I'm still your wife, take your woman away from GED. Do it for me, please, Mike. She got up and walked to the dining room, where she stood motionless, waiting for him to follow her. He too stood up as if in a dream and joined her. She looked at him expectantly. He took the cord and wrapped it around her wrists, tying them together. Mike looked at the table next to her. Liz, stop this, please. I can't. Ariana asked me if I told you I still love you. I do, and I can't bring myself to hurt you like this, he said softly. Please, Mike, she begged. Even if you've already decided to kick me out, even if you decide to divorce me tomorrow, please do it. Even if this is the last time you touch me, do it. Please, I'm begging you, Mike. It seemed to him that he was watching a stranger. It could not be that his voice, full of resentment, was shouting, I told you I'm not interested in your cheesy plans. Liz couldn't hold back her tears any longer and burst into tears. I loved you so much, but you dressed like a fool and smiled as you fancied yourself for him, he said painfully. Again and again, the belt came down until it stopped. He stepped back and looked at her, trying to realize what he had done to her. After that, he took the game completely into his own hands. Only a few moments later, he spewed all of his power out of her. He recoiled, shocked. Then his senses returned to him. He helped her up. She clung to him as he carried her upstairs. She couldn't sit up, and he gently helped her onto the bed in the spare room, the same one. Thank you, she whispered through her tears. Will you help me move my stuff in here tomorrow? He didn't understand. Why? I'm sorry, she cried, but I'm in too much pain to do this now. Finally, he realized. Hell no. He stroked her hair. I only put you here so I could bathe and heal your back. I don't want our bed to get wet. As soon as we're done, I'll put you to bed. Our bed. He hurried downstairs to get a bowl, and then into the bathroom to fill it with warm water and grab a soft washcloth and aloe vera cream. Liz wrinkled her nose as he washed the damaged skin, and again as he gently rubbed the cream into the wounds. I'm really, really sorry, he apologized. I don't even know what it was. "It was an exorcism, and only you could perform it," she said. "There was something inside me, this restlessness, and it needed to be quenched. I love you when you're my loving husband, but I needed another you, a passionate, possessive man, to reclaim what was his. Thank you for showing me that you care." Mike looked at his watch. It was still early evening, but he went downstairs once more to get her a glass of water and a painkiller and turned off the light, returning to her. He helped her to the bathroom and held her. When she finally settled into their bed, he lay on his back and wondered, did they have a future? 4 weeks later, Liz showed her husband the report she had just gotten from her general practitioner. The results of the STD swabs were clean. Mike refused to even think about asking Ariana to find him a partner for the evening until he was sure that Liz hadn't given him the infection she'd picked up from GED. She hadn't. He was a little surprised at her enthusiasm, for they had started spending evenings together again while they waited for the results. Liz offered it to him every night, any way he wanted, and was honest enough to admit that she enjoyed doing it with him, even if it wasn't as enjoyable as they were used to. And then, one night, it happened. A guy at work was talking about how she was with GED, and then stole his job by getting her little girlfriend to lead him around by the nose. Liz had held a grudge all day, but when she got home, she lost it. She burst into tears to the point that it took Mike almost an hour to realize what had really happened. It broke his heart that she was suffering so much because of what GED had done himself, and he hugged her while she sobbed. They both felt something change. Mike realized that he needed to comfort her, and Liz realized that he still felt something for her. They snuggled into each other and kissed for the first time since she'd left to meet GED. Liz let Mike lead her upstairs to their bed and stroked his hair, and slowly they moved on to kissing. Eventually they both finished their sharing and lay on the bed. They were doing it, and they both realized that something between them had died. They fell asleep that night, pressed against each other, each mourning their loss. The next day, Liz called Ariana at work and offered to tell Mike that she had another woman for his bed. One evening, 2 months after that phone call, Mike and Liz were having dinner when they heard the doorbell ring. Mike went to go in, but 2 police officers were on the doorstep. They were investigating an assault and wondered if Mike could help. He invited them into the kitchen, offered them tea, and sat down to listen to them. "Do you know Gerald Dixon?" one of them asked. Mike looked at Liz. "That's Ged's full name," she said. "Oh. In that case, officer," he replied. "I know of him, but we've never met." "Well," said the other cop, 2 nights ago he was beaten badly, and your name was mentioned as someone who might have wished him harm." Mike looked thoughtful. 2 nights ago, so it was Monday? The policeman nodded. "We had dinner guests that night, a young couple who work with my wife. They arrived around 6:30 and left at 11. Does that help?" The cop made a note. "From the looks of it, your wife may have been involved with Mr. Dixon. Is that so?" Mike went to the office and came back with the contract. "We have an open marriage. We both signed this document before my wife met Mr. Dixon. In fact, that same evening, Mrs. Dixon showed up on my doorstep as an unwanted victim. I sent her away as I already had 2 ladies who had agreed to spend the night with me. To tell the truth, my wife thought he was a bad lover, so she had more reason to dislike him than I did." The policeman looked at Liz. She shrugged her shoulders. "It's true. He gave the impression of being a real ladies' man, but that was just talk. Since he left, the other women in the office and some of the men have been telling stories about him being a complete sodomizer. So the number of cuckolded men who might actually want to hurt him is not something to think about. And as for Mike's involvement, if one of Ged's buddies at the car dealership said it, they want to get to me anyway, because I got his job when he screwed up, not one of his buddies." After the police officers left, obviously satisfied, Mike looked at Liz and said, "Isn't it lucky that Scott and Eliza came to dinner that night?" "Yes, Mike," she replied. "But if I remember correctly, it took you 2 hours just to pick out a good wine from the rack in the garage?" Mike smiled. 18 months later, Mike and Ariana got engaged. Mike got engaged to Denise and Ariana got engaged to Terry. Denise was part of Ariana's night crew. A pretty divorced woman with grown children, she and Mike hit it off immediately on their first date. Terry had just opened a business in a neighboring building and asked her to recommend a cleaning lady. Ariana went to make the recommendation, and he invited her out for a drink after work. The next morning, she did a walk of shame, showing up at the office in good spirits and in yesterday's clothes. Mike and Ariana managed to have one more night out before they met their new partners. Both agreed that it had been great, but they were better off being friends and colleagues. Mike also managed to see Jazz before she left for Edinburgh. He took her out to lunch before she went to meet her new boyfriend. They were never really that close together again. And Liz, she and Mike are still close. He found her a nice apartment in one of his buildings, and she's doing well at the dealership. She's seeing someone now, and she told him her story. This time she promised that when they need to talk, it will be before she decides to do something stupid. So, well, this story has come to its logical conclusion. So we have a couple, Mike and Liz. They decided that their relationship was getting boring and started all sorts of experiments. Liz arranged a date with a coworker in an attempt to spice up her life. This, however, led to a bigger crisis as Mike couldn't forgive the cheating. At the same time, Mike organized his dates with the help of friends, which caused more confusion. From this, we can learn that honesty and openness are important in a relationship, and manipulating feelings can lead to destruction. Mike decides to take a break from the relationship to think. From this, we can learn that taking time to think helps to avoid hasty decisions. Liz realizes her mistakes and offers to get back into the relationship. However, something about them dies. After intrigues at the office where Mike comes under suspicion, they do avoid serious problems. Finally, after a few months, they realize that it is better to remain friends, and from that, we realize that reevaluating relationships and making tough decisions can lead to happiness. So, the main lesson: openness, honesty, and sometimes it's important to reevaluate your relationship to find true happiness. Good luck in life and love, my dear viewer.